Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot of interesting things that are happening this morning. We have new polls, and it's the New York Times Siena poll of several battleground states. So this is a really important and very closely watched one because this is considered a highly rated pollster. We also have some interesting polls from other sources as well. Break all of that down for you about the current state of the race. Meanwhile, Trump is really flailing. He bought into this whole AI crowd-sized conspiracy theory. He's still holding on to his former opponent, Joe Biden, just can't let it go. So we'll bring you some of the highlights and lowlights from that. Kamala has launched a very hawkish immigration ad. So we'll take a look at that and what that says about her campaign, her posture, the way she has changed over the years, et cetera. Joe Rogan sort of endorsed RFK Jr. and chaos from the Trump MAGA world
freaked out.
ensued. Again, Trump flailing. Yeah. Trump actually responded to that. Anyway, we'll show you all of that. Meanwhile, in some very, very frightening and quite dire news, Ukraine has actually invaded Russia. It's gotten very little attention in terms of the news media, very little attention in terms of, asking these various candidates what they think about that and where we're going from here. So we'll take a look at that. Israel is still awaiting what Iran's response to Israel's latest provocation may be. There are some developments in terms of potential ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israel continues to slaughter innocent civilians. The latest strike coming with U.S. bombs on a school where displaced Palestinians were sheltering. And but his emails, Trump's campaign emails, were hacked, potentially by Iran. Ken Klippenstein is going to join us to talk about what we could learn there, how the press may handle it, and whether, in fact, what are the indications of whether this was actually Iran or not. So a lot going on there.
Yes, that's right. It is, however, 85 days until Election Day. Wow. I think I'm going to continue this streak about the countdown clock. And next week is going to be the DNC. So we're going to be on the ground in Chicago, the whole team. We've got special coverage planned. Premium subscribers, you guys are going to get a lot of benefits from that. So breakingpoints.com, you want to take advantage. Of course, you also get early access and all of that to the show. So if you can support us, breakingpoints.com. With that, let's get to the polls. We have 1 million, and they're actually quite relevant today.
Yeah, so as I was saying, New York Times Siena, this is considered, a top-tier poll. Everyone watches it really closely, and they polled 3 battleground states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that old blue wall states. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. They show a pretty similar picture in all 3, which is Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump by a margin of 50 to 46. If you dig into this poll and the other questions they asked, it's actually quite interesting. So put the next piece up on the screen. They asked people about whether or not these candidates have certain traits. So on has a clear vision for the country, you have Kamala at 53, and you have Trump outperforming her there at 60. However, on the other traits, Kamala outperforms Trump. So has the temperament to be an effective president. Kamala's at 54, Trump's 45. Is honest. Kamala 52, Trump 41, is intelligent 65 to Trump's 56, will bring about the right kind of change. Kamala 50, Trump 47. Saagar, that last one, I think, is in some ways the most important metric of where this race is, and it really demonstrates how dramatically it has shifted with the change of candidate. Joe Biden, obviously, as the current president, was very much the status quo choice. And when questions were asked like that of him and Trump, Trump was vastly outpacing him. Now, with a new change at the top of the ticket, Kamala narrowly outpacing him on the idea of being the change candidate and bringing about the right type of change. Just one last piece, and I'll get your reaction to overall what this poll had to say. They also tested the presidential and vice presidential picks' favorability across these battleground states. Let's go ahead and put Pennsylvania there up on the screen so you can see, because I think this is another really important indicator, and this is pretty representative of what the net favorables were across each of these blue wall net battleground states. Tim Walz, very popular, plus 11% on net favorables. You still have a good chunk, though, who don't know who he is and are sort of waiting to decide what they think about him. Kamala Harris has dramatically spiked in terms of her favorability. She is now above water in these battleground states. She's plus 2% in Pennsylvania. Trump, he actually has also seen a spike in favorability. He's at -3, so he's not as high as Kamala, but this actually represents the peak of where he has been in recent times as well, which in some ways is a bad sign for him, Saagar, if he's at the peak of his favorability and he's still losing. And then J.D. Vance down at -11 has taken on a good bit of water since his launch. So like I said, this was fairly consistent picture across each of these states. And I do think that this is kind of a very important indicator, is regardless of, where they're positioning themselves on the issues, et cetera. You have one ticket that's broadly popular and one ticket that's broadly unpopular. The Trump campaign obviously looking to try to shift that ground.
They're trying to shape it around. I should remind. I mean, +2 is one of those where I'd rather be in Tim Walz's territory if I were Kamala Harris. We should remember the Democrats, even with roughly a +2% popular vote advantage, can still lose in the Electoral College. What stuck out to me about New York Times Siena was actually coming to the previous polls, where if we saw Biden was down in Pennsylvania by 3 points there. So the swing of Biden to Harris is pretty unbelievable. It's almost 8 points. Keep in mind margin of error and all of that. But I think the movement, whenever we look at where the Joe Biden numbers were in Pennsylvania and previous New York Times Siena polls that I was just looking at across the battleground states and generally compared to now, we're looking at almost 8 to 10 points roughly for from Joe Biden's numbers to Kamala Harris. Nonetheless, that's a very, very big problem for Donald Trump, because it does show, and this is a previous hypothesis, that he has roughly a 46 or 47% ceiling. And that's always been the issue for him, is that where RFK Jr. potentially could be bringing some votes away from Joe Biden, or Joe Biden having very, very low enthusiasm and a variety of other factors, that he could win with a 47, 48%, and perhaps even some disaffected bringing over to 51. But if you're getting an outright majority, that is a big problem. Remember, we're in an election where a net swing of only 100,000 votes is going to move the entire thing.
Yeah.
That's why looking at this movement, it's dangerous territory for Donald Trump right now.
I think that piece about her obtaining an outright majority is an important one, because back in 2016, even though Hillary was consistently polling ahead of Donald Trump, oftentimes she was still under 50%. And so it was a warning sign of, okay, but once people fully decide and, they move off of whatever third-party candidates they claim they're going to support, et cetera, how is this going to work out? And, that's how Trump was able to narrowly eke out the Electoral College victory over Hillary Clinton. So here, when you see Kamala at 50% in all of these battleground states, and not all that many people saying that they're undecided, obviously that's got to be a concern for the Trump campaign. Now, of course, all the caveats in the world. These similar polls show Joe Biden with quite a substantial lead in 2020 at this time. He won, right? So, he did enough to get over the finish line, but they definitely undercounted Trump's support. They undercounted Trump's support in 2016. In 2022, it went the other direction, but then again, Trump wasn't on the ballot, so that's always important to keep in mind. But part of why this New York Times Siena poll is so significant, as Saagar was alluding to, some of their polling that came out while Joe Biden was still in the race was part of the more compelling argument of why he needed to go. Because when even a poll, because he was doing the whole poll denial thing that now the Trump team is adopted of, oh, our polls show something different. We don't buy these fake polls. We don't think that they're correct. That's not what our data is showing, et cetera, et cetera. But it was pretty hard to deny, this particular pollster because of their track record and how much they're respected in terms of their numbers. So a lot that's interesting there. One other thing before we move on to some interesting numbers about who people trust on the economy. I think it was Nate Silver that made this point. Generic Democrat does well against Trump, does well against the Republican Party in general, and always has. And Kamala is not exactly a generic Democrat. She's obviously been in the public eye. People have a lot of feelings about her, et cetera. But she is really trying to occupy that space of generic Democrat. And, that's the way the ticket is trying to shape and position themselves. And listen, that's actually pretty formidable against the Republican Party, and especially a candidate like Trump, who remains broadly, his favorability has gone up as well, post-assassination attempt, et cetera, but in general, he is underwater in terms of popularity.
It's a problem, and this is where, both media and Kamala's inability or unwillingness to sit for long-form interviews, to even put herself in a public and adversarial eye, and only doing rallies, basically adopting the same strategy of Joe Biden and not being in any sense challenged. And then you get a incredible media environment. You put those two things together and you're in the perfect position. You want to be as generic as possible. She's disavowed every public policy position that she's ever had. And it's like everybody is like, oh, I don't even know what you're talking about. Let's talk about something else from several years ago, but we will get to that. This is perhaps the biggest problem I've seen yet for Trump. Let's put this up there on the screen. Keep in mind, this is just one, but movement is important. This is from the FT Financial Times Michigan Michigan Ross poll. They say voters who trust Harris significantly more with the economy than Biden, and it actually has Kamala Harris edging out Donald Trump in his trust on the economy. You could see, for those who are watching, where you had Joe Biden significantly underwater on Donald Trump, where Harris has actually climbed, and more importantly is that the neither figure has dropped dramatically from July to August. So I always bring this up because back in 2020, one of the best indicators of Trump support was not the top line polls. It was not polling averages. It was trust on the economy. It's something the Trump campaign would very often point out to me. I'd be like, hey, it says you're down by 15 points or whatever in Wisconsin. They're like, listen, the economy figure is traditionally much more trusted, and it's one that we are really relying on. And I think they ended up being correct because they only lost by somewhat 60,000 votes or whatever. That was far more predictable because it was genuinely more 50-50 back in 2020 in the midst of COVID, mania. Well, now today, where they had a spread of almost 11, 12, 15 in some cases, if we look on average, if this is perhaps an indicator, maybe they're not tied. Maybe he's only up by 2, maybe 3. That's still way worse than being up by 10, 15, 20, 25 in some
on
cases.
The economy, it's basically a jump ball.
Right.
He cannot afford that.
And he cannot afford
needs
that.
to have an
That's
edge
right.
there because there are a lot of other traits about him that people do not prefer.
Right.
So you have to have a big lead on the economy to make up for that. And it's actually quite fascinating to see the way that this has played out. Joe Biden did her the biggest favor in the world, number one, by naming his economic program Bidenomics. So it's like very closely associated with him and not with her. Yeah. Also by totally sidelining her. I mean, she's been basically invisible as a vice president. So she, it appears, got all the benefits of having the trappings and the station of the office and enabling people to envision her in that commander-in-chief role. However, because she was sidelined, people aren't blaming her for whatever things that they didn't like about the Biden administration. The other thing that I would say is, Biden's favorability rating has come up too since he decided to drop out of the race. So much of what was weighing down this ticket, it now is really clear, was just about this guy being really, really old. And that was, that's an entirely legitimate concern and perspective. Apparently, even the president himself came to agree with that assessment. So, the fact that people believe she will do better on the economy, they are not tying her to whatever, the most unpopular positions of this administration or performance of this administration was. They feel like she represents more of a positive change than Donald Trump, even though she is, part of the administration right now. These are all extraordinary things that I would not necessarily have predicted. But also, Saagar, the Trump campaign, they're going to try to change that. Their whole mission is going to be, at least through their paid communications, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be capable of doing a very effective job of pushing this message, but the paid communications will be very much about tying her to the less popular parts of this administration. I think immigration is probably their strongest hit on her, the whole borders are thing. There was some testing we'll show you in a little bit from a Democratic group about which attacks were the most salient. That was the most difficult one for her to be able to parry, which is why she's already putting out some immigration stuff. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a minute. But right now they've got some work to do. And the other thing is, time is really short.
Yes, 85 days. It's not a long time.
While Trump is out here flailing around and still wishing it was Joe Biden, indulging in insane conspiracy theories, the Harris Walz team is, been much more focused and on message. They're defining themselves. They're defining J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. And they're headed into a convention where most of the time, the party comes out of the convention with a bump, then you're into Labor Day and you're in the final sprint.
That's exactly right.
So there isn't that much time for Trump and Vance to change the, ground of this fight and be able to redefine what right now is a race that's slipping away for them.
Trump has really lost his edge. And I think, look, we can empathize at a certain point at a human level. It's probably dizzying. It's crazy for us. And we're not even running. We're not the ones who are actually in the race. You can't imagine probably what it's like to go from front runner back to 2016 insurgent status. I have been watching a lot of some of the MAGA influencers, boosters, and others. And the ones who are honest are like, okay, we're in a knife fight now. Now we're back to 2016. Yeah. We're the underdog at this point. You have the entire media apparatus against us. You have a unified Democratic Party, very much like they had under Hillary Clinton in 2016. You had the same level of the unification of really the party establishment of the Democrats from that time period. And this time, we're going to have to fight just like we did last time. The problem is Trump is a different man from that time around.
Yeah, that's
he doesn't have the same almost freewheeling nature nature. His campaign today is a balloon that includes the RNC, that includes donors and all these other things. He needs to be unburdened by what has been. I actually think he needs to return to the scrappy staff of like 10 people sitting in Trump Tower. And it turns out that was one of the most potent political forces in modern American history. I almost think he's being weighed down by being, in some ways, the Republican establishment today, where previously his fighting instincts of coming and beating the establishment for the GOP nomination set him up for victory in 2016. There are a variety of things we could talk about, both policy and just campaign as well. He doesn't have the vigor that he did. I remember watching that man crisscross that country every single day. It was shocking to even younger people how he could get like 2-3 hours of sleep, and he would be doing all these rallies. And as president, he mostly kept up that schedule, but a lot of that is diminished. And the problem is that this dizzying, like finding yourself, like defining who we are, you don't have time for that right now. And I don't want to, waste too much right now because we are going to get to that, but put this up there on the screen. All the data in the world tells you and backs up what I'm saying. Here we have the Nevada poll. A new poll of likely Nevada voters found Kamala with a nearly 6% lead over Donald Trump. That is the largest lead for a Democrat in any presidential poll of Nevada's this cycle. Why is this crazy? Because Trump was up in Nevada by a couple of points for months, to the point where they were like, hey, we've got Nevada in the bag. Sure, it's going to be a battleground. We're going to have to spend some money. But the amount of money that I think that they previously had thought about having to allocate to Nevada, now all of a sudden we're in a totally different world. So your entire plan, your media plan, everything had to be torn up in the last couple of weeks. And in the interim period, you have all of this incredible earned media enthusiasm for Kamala, lack of scrutiny on the record, the fact that she hasn't done these interviews is the best possible moment. The only question is this the honeymoon period, or is it not? And it's just too soon to say, because I think the convention, the strategic advantage of that convention, of their convention happening when Joe Biden was president, of them having that bump post-assassination and everything, and not having the same, the same opportunity to define Kamala Harris, to have the unified media paying attention to them. I don't think I can overstate how really terrible it is for the GOP.
Yeah.
That they blew their convention already. And I mean, it's not their fault. Of course, they didn't know, but it's a major disadvantage.
No, absolutely. And, they clearly didn't, even though they had long been saying they thought it was possible, even before the disastrous debate, et cetera, that they thought it was possible that they would pull Joe Biden. They clearly didn't really prepare. And Trump certainly was not really able to wrap his head around it. And he still isn't. In Nevada, John Ralston, who is like the political guru in Nevada, I remember previous polls coming out under Biden where he's looking at this, he's going, not only are they going to lose for president, like Jackie Rosen, who's running for re-election in the Senate, is in trouble. There's a number of swing districts in Nevada. He's like, you just can't have this kind of presidential margin and think that you're going to be able to hang on to these seats or pick up these seats. So now, with the shoe completely on the other foot, it really is remarkable to see. And then also previously, when it was Biden, you had Republicans saying, hey, maybe we're going to put Virginia into play. Maybe we're going to put New Mexico into play. Maybe we're going to put Colorado into play. Now it's Democrats who are positioning themselves to be able to go on the offense in states that were beyond what Joe Biden was able to win in 2020. The place where they're most clearly making the play and have the best chance of success is North Carolina. We can put this up on the screen. So this latest poll, this is from YouGov. This is an A-rated pollster also, has it tied. In North Carolina, Harris 46, Trump 46. This is a state Biden lost, I want to say, by about 1.8 percentage points. So it was not a lot. But it's also a state that, Democrats, ever since Obama won it in 2008, it's a state that Democrats can come close in, but they can't really seem to get over the top. They're hoping with Harris's sort of newly reconstituted coalition that she may be able to pull off the state of North Carolina. And another thing that they've got really weighing them down there is the Republicans have a very unpopular gubernatorial nominee who in this very same poll was losing to the Democrat by 10 points because Mark Robinson, isn't that his name? He's said some wild things and it looks to be headed to defeat there. That can help drag down the Republican ticket overall. So, I think you'd still bet on Republicans there. They still definitely have the edge. But now Democrats are spending money there and Republicans are having to actually protect that state when previously they were playing with, hey, do we go on offense in, states that we didn't think we could have on the map before?
For example, if we look at the Senate race, it's very similar. In 2020, Tom Tillis, everybody thought it was possible that the Democrat could beat him. Cal Cunningham, Cal also had some of his own issues. But, Tom Tillis only won by about 2%, something like that.
Yeah.
1.5 roughly. That's not a great margin of victory. That's not what you want to be in a traditional state. Now, remember, another thing I've been continuing to try to bring up, North Carolina has significantly changed in the last 4 years. It has one of the most booming economies in the entire United States, second only to Arizona. They have had massive population inflow to Raleigh and to Charlotte in those urban areas. They have a lot of fundamentals, East Coast time, banking, lots of jobs. It's a good place to live if you're under 25 or so. They have high starting salaries relative to the other big cities. But what that means is that they will have a similar Georgia phenomenon or Austin phenomenon, where you have all of these people, largely from blue states, probably highly educated, or people with bachelor's degrees who are moving in and becoming newly registered voters. And that is just enough, perhaps, to turn the tide when we look at only a couple of 100,000 votes, which are the margin of victory. And, things don't have to go things can go a different way. If it rains, if it snows, whatever. Something could very much materialize, a surprise there. Most importantly, what I just brought up about Nevada, where they didn't think they would have to spend that much money in Nevada or that much in North Carolina. Well, now you might have to spend millions just to win by 1 or 2%. That's a bad situation generally. Let's put the final one up there, please, on the screen. This was an Arizona poll. This was conducted after July 30, and this shows Kamala actually leading Trump by about 2.8%. And that is in the U.S. Senate race. They have Gallego up by 11% over Kari Lake. So this is the other question. Is Kari Lake going to be a drag on the Trump ticket? Very possible, considering how unpopular she appears to be in the race in Arizona. The flip side of that for Donald Trump is that I saw a rally, I believe, with Kamala of some 25,000 people in a stadium in Arizona. That is astounding. Then they had to turn people away at the door. That's a bad situation. I mean, that level of enthusiasm. Arizona, similar actually. They have double the economic growth of North Carolina, what I was just talking about. Their inflow is massive from California and from elsewhere. Their economy is booming, and Maricopa County, as we all learned in 2020, is that prime suburban white vote that Kamala and Biden are going after with everything that they have got. Highly educated, very like they want to come out and vote specifically on abortion. And then what did we all forget? What happened in Arizona just several months ago? That whole 1864 abortion ban and all that nightmare. You think if you think they've forgotten that, they certainly haven't. Millions of dollars in ad spend is there on abortion right now.
I'm pretty sure they have an abortion ballot initiative this fall as well, which could very much help drive turnout and be, in a close race, could be a determining factor. But yeah, I don't know if it's quite as stark as in 2022, where the Republicans nominated just a rash of candidates that were really, unpalatable to a mainstream audience. But you do have in some key states, Kari Lake weighing down the ticket in Arizona, Mark Robinson weighing down the ticket in North Carolina, and also contributing to the Democratic messaging that this is a fringe ticket, this is a quote unquote weird ticket, that are, these are all headwinds that Republicans now have to deal with that previously they were completely sailing above.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.